She was sentenced to death under the sun, and the cowboy who freed her paid a high price. The sun had already climbed high in the sky, and its relentless heat poured down on the small frontier town. The streets were dusty and empty, except for the townspeople who had gathered in the square. They were quiet now, but their murmurs and glances spoke volumes of fear, curiosity, and the cruel anticipation that often came when someone faced punishment. In the center of the square stood a wooden post, rough and weathered, with ropes coiled around it. The woman tied there was small and slender, yet her presence filled the space with an almost painful intensity. She was trembling, but not from weakness alone. She was afraid, yes, but also from the humiliation of standing accused in front of the entire town. Her name was Clara. She had lived on the outskirts of the town with her family, tending to a small farm that barely fed them. Her life had been simple, quiet, and honest, filled with long days working the soil, feeding chickens, and gathering water from the creek. But a week ago, everything had changed. She had been accused of stealing from the local merchant, a man known for his sharp tongue and quick temper. He claimed that Clara had taken some of his supplies during a visit to the market, but the truth was far more complicated. She had seen him cheat others, she had witnessed his lies, and she had only spoken out to defend an innocent neighbor. Somehow, the accusation had shifted onto her, and suddenly she was labeled a criminal in the eyes of the town. The judge, a tall man with a stern face and eyes like cold steel, had made the sentence official that very morning. He read the words aloud in a voice that carried across the square: "Death at high noon." The townspeople had murmured, some in agreement, some in silent horror. They claimed it was justice. Some of them had never spoken to Clara before. Some had barely noticed her. Yet now they were witnesses to her sentencing, bound by fear and the law. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to look at the crowd. Every face in the audience seemed to hold judgment, curiosity, or anger, and she could feel the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on her. Among the townsfolk stood a man who was different from the rest. He was a cowboy, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn boots, faded jeans, and a dusty hat pulled low over his face. He had arrived in the town only a few days ago, seeking work as a ranch hand. But now, as he watched Clara stand tied and trembling, he felt a sense of unease growing in his chest. He had been in the frontier long enough to know injustice when he saw it. He knew what fear looked like, and he knew the desperation in Clara's eyes was real. There was no crime here that deserved death. The cowboy's name was James. He was not a hero by trade. He did not seek fame or recognition. But he had a strong sense of right and wrong, one that had been shaped by years of hard work and observing the hardships of life on the open plains. He saw Clara's defiance, even in her fear, and it sparked something in him. He could not turn away. He could not allow an innocent person to die under the harsh sun while the town's eyes watched in silent approval. As the judge continued to speak, explaining the laws and the severity of her supposed crime, Clara's mind raced. She had never imagined that standing up for what was right could lead her to this fate. She thought of her family, of her little brother who often ran to her for comfort, of her mother who had taught her to be honest even when honesty brought hardship. She thought of the future she might never have. The sun burned down on her neck, on her shoulders, on her face. She felt every bead of sweat, every prick of heat, as if the sun itself were punishing her for something she had not done. James shifted his weight from one foot to another. He noticed the guard standing near the post, watching Clara closely, waiting for the moment to carry out the sentence. Their hands rested on their weapons, ready to act at any sudden movement. He studied the ropes binding her wrists and ankles. They were thick, rough, and tied tightly. If she tried to move, it would only cause her pain. If she struggled, it would make the task of freeing her far more difficult. James's mind worked quickly, mapping out a plan. He had no illusions about the danger he was facing. One wrong move and it could mean his own death. but he also knew that doing nothing was unacceptable. Clara felt the eyes of the crowd. She tried to hold her head high, but her body betrayed her fear. Her hands were raw from the ropes, her skin blistered from the sun, and her legs ached from standing so long. The air was heavy and dry, making every breath feel like swallowing fire. She heard whispers from the crowd. Some were pitying, some were cruel, and some were encouraging. She wished she could disappear, wished she could somehow melt into the ground and be gone. But there was nowhere to hide, and the ropes held her firmly in place. James knew that action had to be precise. He could not afford hesitation. He waited for a moment when the judge turned to speak to one of the townspeople, when the guards shifted their weight and let their attention lapse even for a second. He moved closer, using the shadow of a nearby building for cover. Each step was careful, silent. Every nerve in his body was tense, alert to any sudden movement. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and felt the small, sharp knife he had hidden there. The metal was cool and reassuring against his fingers. He whispered softly to himself, a promise he did not fully know he could keep. "I won't let them take her." Clara, meanwhile, had sensed something different. A presence, a protective force she could not see, seemed to brush against her, giving her a flicker of hope. She heard the faintest sound of movement nearby and turned her head slightly, trying to see who might be there. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drum. Could it be an ally, or was it another person coming to watch her punishment? Fear and hope mingled within her, a confusing storm of emotion that made her head spin. The sun climbed higher still. The judge raised his hand, signaling that the moment of punishment was near. Clara's stomach twisted. She thought of how little time she had left, of how quickly life could end. And then she heard a faint whisper in her ear, carried by the wind, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. "Trust me." Her head snapped toward the sound, and for the first time she noticed a man moving with deliberate caution among the shadows. His hat was pulled low, his eyes hidden, but his presence radiated determination. Something in his movements told her that he was not there to harm her. She felt a strange sense of relief, small but significant, and she nodded slightly, though no one could see. She wanted to trust him. She had no other choice. James saw the small nod and took it as a signal that she was ready to act. He moved closer, careful not to attract the attention of the guards. Every second mattered. He watched the ropes, planning exactly where to cut, how to free her without making noise, without drawing immediate retaliation. The tension was unbearable. He could hear the shallow breaths of the woman in the post, the murmurs of the townsfolk, and the harsh, dry wind that swept through the square. Then, at last, the moment came. The sheriff, a burly man with a thick beard, stepped slightly away to adjust the ropes on the post. James seized the chance. He moved quickly, silently, with the precision of a man who had spent his life in dangerous situations. The knife flashed in the sun, cutting through the ropes that bound Clara's wrists. She flinched at the sting, but the pain was nothing compared to the relief that followed. Another cut and her ankles were free. Clara stumbled slightly, catching herself against the post. The crowd gasped, some shouting, some frozen in disbelief. James extended his hand to her. "Come with me," he whispered. Her eyes met his, wide with fear and disbelief. Could this be real? Could someone really be here to save her? She placed her hand in his, and together they moved toward the edge of the square, careful to stay in the shadows as much as possible. The townsfolk began to react. Some shouted for the guards, some tried to block their path. But the confusion and chaos worked in James's favor. He led Clara through narrow alleys and past abandoned buildings, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. Her heart raced, but the fear that had weighed so heavily on her minutes ago began to lift, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. They reached the edge of town, where the open plain stretched endlessly beneath the glaring sun. Clara looked around, breathing in the wide-open space, the only sound the distant call of a hawk. For a moment, She allowed herself to hope that freedom was possible, that the life she had almost lost could still be saved. James mounted his horse first and then helped her onto hers, keeping his eyes constantly on the town behind them. As they rode away, the sun continued its relentless climb, casting long shadows across the dusty plains. Clara held on tightly, her fear still present but tempered by gratitude and growing trust. James, alert and cautious, guided their path toward the safety of the hills in the distance. He knew that this was only the beginning. Freedom would not come easily and danger would follow them, but he also knew that he could not abandon her now, not after coming this far. The town shrank behind them as they rode, a dusty memory beneath the blazing sun. Clara's hands, once bound, now gripped the reins with determination. James rode beside her, silent but vigilant, their journey just beginning. The sun beat down on them both, hot and unrelenting, but it no longer symbolized death or despair. For the first time in hours, or perhaps days, Clara felt the first glimmer of hope. And James, despite the risk and the fear, felt a quiet pride in standing up for what was right, even under the scorching sun. The plain stretched endlessly before them, golden under the hot sun, with waves of heat rising from the dry earth. Clara clutched the reins of her horse tightly, her muscles sore from hours of tension and fear. She could still hear the faint shouts of the townsfolk echoing behind her, carried by the wind, but each step away from the town brought her closer to safety. Beside her, James guided his horse with careful precision, scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuers. Every rustle in the grass, every distant sound made him tense, ready for anything. Clara's mind raced. She had survived the immediate danger, but the thought of what would come next was terrifying. She was an innocent woman now marked as a criminal in the eyes of the law. The townsfolk would not forget her escape, and the sheriff would surely raise a posse to find her. She knew she could not go back, not ever. And yet, despite the fear, she felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real, that she had been given a second chance. She looked at James, wondering who the stranger was who had risked everything for her. His face was calm, determined, and his eyes reflected a quiet strength. He seemed almost like a figure from one of the stories her mother had told her as a child, the kind of person who appeared when all hope seemed lost. James glanced at her briefly, noticing the sweat on her forehead, the tension in her shoulders. He gave a small, reassuring nod. "We have to keep moving," he said in a low voice. "They won't give up easily. We can't stop until we're far from the town." Clara nodded, too exhausted to speak. She trusted him completely, though she barely knew him. She had no choice. Her life depended on it. The first challenge was simple but dangerous. The open plains offered no cover. The sun beat down relentlessly, and their horses were already tired from the morning's ride. James guided them toward a narrow canyon he had spotted earlier. It was a risky path, steep rocks on either side and uneven ground, but it offered shade and protection from anyone who might be following. Clara's heart pounded as they approached the canyon. She could feel every jolt of the horse beneath her, every sharp stone that scraped against its hooves. Once inside the canyon, the air grew cooler. The steep walls cast long shadows across the ground, and for the first time since leaving the town, Clara felt a sense of relief. She could see the sun above, but it no longer felt like a fiery punishment. It was just the sun, shining on an open, wild world full of possibilities. James slowed his horse, keeping his eyes sharp. He knew that danger could come from anywhere, and the narrow canyon could also become a trap if enemies pursued them. They rode for hours, moving carefully through the winding paths. Clara tried to steady her breathing and calm her nerves. She had always been strong in her own way, but the constant fear and the sun's heat were exhausting. Her muscles ached, and her mouth felt dry and cracked. Yet with every step, the distance between her and the town grew, and with it, a growing sense of freedom. She realized that she had survived something unimaginable, and that survival itself was a victory. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, James found a small natural spring hidden in the canyon. Water trickled down from a rock face, forming a shallow pool. The sight of it was almost miraculous. Clara's horse bent its head to drink eagerly, while she knelt beside the water and drank deeply, letting the cool liquid soothe her parched throat. James filled a small flask he carried and offered it to her. "We need to stay hydrated," he said simply, but there was a kindness in his voice that made her feel safe. She accepted it gratefully. While they rested, James spoke quietly. "You have to tell me everything," he said. "I need to know why they wanted to punish you like that." Clara hesitated. She had lived in fear and shame for a week, and speaking about it now was difficult. But she realized that she needed to trust him completely if they were to survive together. Slowly, she began to explain. She told him about the merchant, about how she had tried to help a neighbor, and how the accusation had fallen on her. She spoke of her family, her farm, and the small, quiet life she had known before the sudden nightmare began. James listened carefully, his face expressionless but his eyes attentive. When she finished, he nodded. "I believe you," he said simply, "and I won't let them harm you again." Clara felt a lump in her throat. It was strange to feel such trust for someone she had just met, but she knew in her heart that he was sincere. There was no time to waste in sentiment, though. Night would fall soon, and traveling in darkness brought its own dangers. They set off again as the canyon narrowed. The walls pressed close on either side, and the ground became rocky and uneven. Clara's horse stumbled once, nearly throwing her, but James steadied both horses with calm authority. "Careful," he murmured. "We're not far from the ridge. If we reach it, we'll have a better view and can plan our next move." Hours passed. The sky shifted from bright blue to shades of orange and pink as the sun sank low. The air cooled, but the tension did not. James remained alert, scanning every ridge and outcrop for signs of movement. He knew that the town's posse would not give up easily, and the longer they stayed in the canyon, the greater the chance of being discovered. Clara followed his lead, learning to move quietly, to trust his instincts, and to read the signs in the wild around them. Finally, they emerged from the canyon onto a wide plateau overlooking the plains below. From this vantage point, James could see for miles. The town was far in the distance now, a small cluster of buildings, but he could see the faint trail of smoke from chimneys and the occasional figure moving. It was clear that the townspeople had begun searching, though they had not yet spotted the fugitives. James guided Clara to a large boulder and let their horses rest. Clara felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. They were safer than before, but the journey was far from over. She looked at James and spoke quietly. "How will we know where to go next?" He gave her a steady look. "We follow the land and we stay ahead of them. There are friends I know, people who can help us, but we have to move carefully. One wrong step and it could all be over." Night fell completely, bringing a cool breeze and a sky filled with stars. Clara had never seen the sky like this before. The constellations stretched above them in a perfect array, and for the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. James kept watch while she rested, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. She felt safe with him, though the weight of what lay ahead kept her mind alert. As they prepared to move again under the cover of darkness, James spoke softly about the journey ahead. He explained that they would have to navigate through rough terrain, avoid roads where travelers might spot them, and find people willing to offer shelter. Clara listened intently. She realized that her freedom depended not just on her survival, but on the choices she made with James by her side. Every step forward was a step toward life, but it was also a step into uncertainty. They traveled quietly, moving through narrow valleys, climbing over ridges and following paths less likely to be seen by others. The horses were weary, but James pushed them gently, careful not to overwork them. Clara learned to ride in a way she had never imagined, moving with balance and precision, trusting both herself and the man guiding her. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding and determination. By dawn, they had reached a small grove of trees near a gentle stream. The first light of day broke through the branches, casting dappled shadows on the ground. They stopped to rest again. Clara drank from the stream, letting the cool water wash away the dust and sweat of the night's journey. James examined their surroundings, checking for tracks or signs of pursuit. He knew that even now, safety was temporary. The world outside the town was wild and unpredictable, and they had to be ready for anything. Clara looked at James, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you helping me? You could have stayed safe." James looked at her, his expression serious but kind. "Because it's right," he said simply. "I couldn't let them take your life for something you didn't do. I know what it's like to see someone punished unfairly. I couldn't stand by." His words touched her deeply. For the first time, she felt that not all people were cruel or selfish. There were still those willing to risk everything for what was right. They rested in the grove for a while, allowing their horses to graze and regain strength. Clara used the time to gather herself, to prepare mentally for the next leg of their journey. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, filled with dangers both seen and unseen. But with James guiding her, she felt a growing confidence that they could make it. Together, they were stronger than they had been alone. As the sun rose higher, they mounted their horses again and continued their journey. Each mile they covered brought them farther from the town and closer to freedom. Clara's heart, once filled with fear, now held a mixture of hope and determination. She had survived the first trial, but the journey was just beginning. And with James by her side, she knew that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead together. The sun had barely risen over the hills when Clara and James set off again, their horses moving carefully over the uneven ground. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and dry grass, a small comfort compared to the harsh heat they had endured in the town. Despite the calm of the morning, tension hung over them like a shadow. Every step, every sound, every movement could mean danger. The townspeople had already begun searching, and they would not stop until they found Clara. James knew they had to stay alert, but he also knew that fear alone would not carry them through the long journey ahead. Clara's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Relief at having escaped the square mixed with fear of what lay ahead. Her legs ached from riding, her hands were raw from gripping the reins, and her throat was still dry from the journey, yet she felt a spark of determination. She had survived something unimaginable, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope. But hope was fragile, and danger was everywhere. She could not forget the angered faces of the townspeople or the cold, unwavering expression of the judge. James guided them along a narrow trail that wound through hills and valleys. The path was hidden from view, known only to those familiar with the land. He chose it carefully, aware that the slightest mistake could lead them into the hands of those pursuing them. The horses moved steadily, their hooves making soft sounds against the dirt and rocks. Clara leaned forward slightly, trying to ease the strain on her back, while James kept a watchful eye on the horizon. As they rode, Clara finally spoke. "Do you think they will catch us?" Her voice was quiet, almost fragile, but full of fear. James did not answer immediately. He knew that fear could cloud judgment, and he wanted her to remain calm. "It's possible," he said finally, his voice steady. "But we will do everything we can to stay ahead. We have to keep moving, think carefully, and trust each other." Clara nodded. She had no choice but to trust him completely. He had already risked his life for her once. She knew he would not let her down. Hours passed, and the terrain grew more challenging. The trail became rocky and steep, forcing the horses to move slowly and carefully. Clara's muscles burned from the effort of staying balanced, and the sun climbed higher, making the day hotter. Yet they could not stop. James encouraged the horses gently, using soft words and light touches to guide them over the obstacles. He knew that pushing them too hard could be dangerous, but moving too slowly would allow their pursuers to catch up. During a brief pause, they found a small grove of trees near a shallow creek. The water was clear and cool, and Clara knelt to drink, letting the refreshing liquid soothe her parched throat. James refilled his flask, keeping watch for any signs of movement in the distance. "We can rest here for a short while," he said, "but we cannot stay too long." "They will be looking for us soon." Clara nodded, her body exhausted but her mind alert. She had learned quickly that survival depended on constant vigilance and careful planning. As they rested, Clara began to notice the small details of the land around them. The way the sunlight filtered through the leaves, the soft rustle of grass in the breeze, the distant call of a bird. It was a strange and peaceful contrast to the danger she had just escaped. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond fear, a life where she could be free and safe. James noticed the brief smile that crossed her face and felt a small sense of relief. It was rare to see hope in her eyes, and he knew that maintaining it would be crucial for their journey. The day grew hotter, and they resumed their journey. The path became increasingly difficult, with loose rocks and sharp inclines. Clara's horse stumbled once, and she felt a surge of panic. James reached out quickly, steadying her and whispering calm words. "Careful, we are almost past the worst of this section," he said. Clara took a deep breath and focused on the trail ahead, trusting his guidance. Together they moved steadily, each step bringing them farther from the town and closer to safety. As afternoon approached, they reached a small ridge that overlooked a wide valley. From this vantage point, James could see for miles. The town was far behind and the trail ahead appeared empty, but he knew better than to assume they were safe. He scanned the landscape carefully, looking for signs of pursuit or danger. Clara watched him closely, sensing his vigilance. She realized that his calm exterior hid a mind constantly calculating, planning, and anticipating threats. She felt grateful and a little awed by his skill and determination. James pointed to a distant cluster of trees. "We can rest there for the night," he said. "It will give us cover and water. We should reach it before dark." Clara nodded, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The thought of shelter, even temporary, was comforting. She had survived so much already, and the idea of rest was almost like a promise of normal life, if only for a few hours. As they descended into the valley, the landscape became greener, with patches of grass and wildflowers dotting the earth. The creek they had passed earlier widened slightly, offering a small pool of water. James guided the horses to the edge, letting them drink and graze. Clara knelt beside the water, washing the sweat and dust from her face. She felt a strange sense of calm in the presence of the flowing creek, as if the water carried away some of the fear and tension that had weighed on her for so long. Night fell slowly, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. James led them to a dense grove of trees, where the shadows provided natural cover. They dismounted quietly, tying the horses to nearby trees. Clara helped to adjust the reins and check the animals, learning from James how to care for them during the journey. The grove was quiet, except for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of night birds. For the first time in days, Clara felt a sense of safety, however temporary it might be. They made a small fire, just enough to keep warm and cook a simple meal of bread and dried meat that James had carried. Clara ate slowly, savoring each bite, while James kept watch, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Conversation between them was sparse, but each word carried meaning. They shared stories of their pasts, their fears, and their hopes. Clara learned that James had traveled extensively across the plains, helping those in need and sometimes confronting danger. She realized that his courage was not born of recklessness, but of experience, skill, and a strong sense of justice. After their meal, they settled on blankets under the trees. Clara tried to rest, but sleep was elusive. Her mind replayed the events of the past day, the escape, the flight, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. James remained alert, watching the shadows, listening to every sound. He knew that rest was essential, but vigilance could not be abandoned. The world outside the town was full of dangers, and they had to be ready for anything. Hours passed quietly, and Clara finally allowed herself to drift into a light sleep. She dreamed of open fields, of the town fading into the distance, and of a life where she could be free. James, meanwhile, remained awake, his senses sharp. He thought about the path ahead, the obstacles they would face, and the people who might help or hinder them. He knew that the journey would test both of them in ways they had not yet imagined. Morning came slowly, with the soft glow of dawn filtering through the trees. The air was cool, and the forest around them seemed to hold its breath. James stirred first, checking the horses and the perimeter. Clara followed soon after, feeling the soreness in her muscles but also a renewed determination. They could not linger. Each day brought new challenges, and the longer they stayed in one place, the higher the risk of discovery. They packed their belongings and mounted their horses, moving quietly through the grove and back onto the trail. The sun rose higher, warming the earth, but the light no longer felt oppressive. Clara's mind was focused, her senses alert, and her trust in James growing stronger with each passing moment. She had survived the immediate danger, but the journey was far from over. Together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, moving steadily toward freedom and safety. The trail led them through hills and valleys, over streams and rocky paths. Clara learned to read the land, noticing subtle signs that indicated animals, travelers, or potential threats. James taught her to move silently, to make the horses follow the natural contours of the land, and to remain calm even when fear threatened to overwhelm her. Each lesson was a step toward survival, a skill that would serve her well in the days to come. By late afternoon, they reached a small ridge overlooking a distant valley filled with trees and open fields. James stopped to rest the horses and scout the area. He pointed out a path that would take them closer to safety, a hidden route that few travelers knew. Clara felt a mix of relief and anxiety. The journey was far from over, but each mile they traveled brought them closer to freedom. She realized that survival depended not only on courage but also on trust, skill, and determination. As they continued, the sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains. The light was softer now, less harsh, and Clara felt a small sense of peace. She had come far, survived so much, and learned more about herself than she ever imagined. James rode beside her, silent but ever vigilant, a steady presence in a world full of uncertainty. Together, they moved forward, step by step, toward the hope of safety and freedom. The journey had become more difficult than ever. Days of travel across the plains and hills had worn both Clara and James to the bone. Their muscles ached from riding long hours, their hands were blistered from gripping the reins, and their clothes were dusty and torn from the rough terrain. Yet they pressed on, knowing that stopping for too long could mean disaster. Behind them, the town's posse was relentless, spreading out across the countryside in search of the runaway woman and the cowboy who had dared to rescue her. James could feel the weight of every mile they traveled, knowing that danger was never far behind. The morning air was crisp as they rode along a narrow valley. Clara's horse stumbled on loose rocks and she nearly fell. James reached out quickly, steadying her and whispering words of reassurance. "Careful," he said softly. "The ground is tricky here. We have to watch every step." Clara took a deep breath and focused, learning to trust her horse, the land, and James all at once. She was no longer just a frightened woman running from danger. She was becoming a partner in their flight, alert, cautious, and determined to survive. As the day wore on, the sun climbed high in the sky, casting long, sharp shadows across the rocky terrain. The heat was exhausting, and both horses were growing tired. James led them to a small grove of trees near a hidden creek. The water was clear and cold, a welcome relief after hours of travel. Clara drank deeply, letting the cool liquid soothe her parched throat, while James checked their surroundings carefully. He scanned the ridges, the distant hills, and the valleys beyond. There were no signs of pursuit yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time. They allowed the horses to rest and graze for a short while, and Clara took a moment to collect her thoughts. She had been through so much in the past days, accused of a crime she did not commit, sentenced to death, tied to a post under the blazing sun, and rescued by a man she barely knew. It was a whirlwind of fear, hope, and gratitude that left her feeling both fragile and strong at the same time. She glanced at James, who was quietly observing their surroundings, his posture alert and calm. She realized how much she had come to rely on him, not only for protection but also for guidance. James finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "We can't stay here long. They'll be looking for us, and the longer we linger, the higher the risk." "We have to keep moving," Clara nodded, understanding the urgency. Every day, every mile was a test of endurance, courage, and resourcefulness. They mounted their horses and continued along the trail, following a winding path that led through rocky hills and narrow valleys. The landscape was beautiful, wild, and dangerous all at once. Clara found herself marveling at the scenery despite the danger, feeling a strange mixture of awe and fear. As they moved, James explained the plan. "We'll head toward a ranch I know. It's hidden and remote, and the owner is a friend. He'll help us." Clara's heart lifted slightly at the thought of shelter, even temporary. "How far is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "A day's ride," James replied. "If we keep moving and stay careful, we should reach it by nightfall." Clara nodded, determined to endure whatever lay ahead. The day grew hotter, and the path became increasingly difficult. Loose rocks and steep inclines forced the horses to slow, and Clara's muscles ached with every step. Sweat poured down her face and back, and she felt the sting of the sun on her skin. James kept a steady pace, checking on her and the horses frequently. "Take it easy," he said. "We'll rest when we can, but we have to keep going." Clara bit her lip, pushing through the exhaustion. She had survived so much already. She could survive this too. As afternoon approached, they reached a narrow canyon that offered both shade and protection. James led them carefully through the rocky passage, alert to every sound. Clara followed closely, trusting his instincts and learning to navigate the dangerous terrain herself. They moved slowly, quietly, aware that any noise could alert pursuers to their location. The canyon walls were steep and jagged, casting deep shadows that shifted with the sun. It was a difficult path, but it was safer than crossing open land where they could be spotted from miles away. Hours passed, and the canyon seemed endless. Clara's body ached, and her mind grew weary from the constant vigilance. Yet she felt a strange sense of resilience growing within her. Each obstacle they overcame, each mile traveled, strengthened her resolve. She had escaped death, survived the town's anger, and endured the harsh landscape. She realized that she was no longer the same woman who had been tied to a post under the sun. She was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. As the sun began to descend, casting long shadows across the canyon, James found a small alcove where they could rest. The space was sheltered, with a gentle breeze that offered relief from the heat. He led the horses to a nearby patch of grass, letting them graze and drink from a small spring. Clara knelt beside the water, washing the sweat and dust from her face and hands. She felt a moment of peace, however brief, and allowed herself to rest her weary body. James remained alert, scanning the surroundings for any signs of movement. He knew that danger was never far away and that the town's posse would not give up easily. He had risked his life to save Clara, and he would not allow that sacrifice to be in vain. "We'll stay here until nightfall," he said quietly. "Then we'll move again, following the hidden trail that leads to the ranch." Clara nodded, trusting his judgment completely. She had learned to rely on him, not only for protection but also for guidance and support. As night fell, they made a small fire, just enough to provide warmth and light. James prepared a simple meal of bread and dried meat, and Clara ate slowly, savoring the nourishment after a long day of travel. Conversation between them was sparse, but meaningful. They spoke of their pasts, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Clara learned more about James, about his travels, his sense of justice, and his quiet courage. She realized that his bravery was not reckless but measured, born from experience and a deep understanding of the dangers they faced. After the meal, they settled down under the trees. Clara lay on a blanket, exhausted but alert. Her thoughts wandered to the events that had brought her here, the false accusation, the town's anger, and the narrow escape. She felt a mixture of fear, relief, and gratitude. James kept watch, his senses sharp, listening to every sound in the night. He knew that even in moments of apparent safety, they could not let their guard down. The world outside the town was unpredictable, and they had to be ready for anything. Hours passed quietly. Clara finally allowed herself to drift into a light sleep, dreaming of freedom, open fields, and a life without fear. James remained awake, his eyes scanning the darkness. He thought about the path ahead, the challenges they would face, and the people who might help or hinder them. He knew that their journey would test them in ways they had not yet imagined, but he also knew that they had come too far to turn back. Morning came slowly, with the soft light of dawn filtering through the trees. The air was cool and fresh, a welcome change from the heat of the previous day. James stirred first, checking the horses and the surroundings. Clara followed, stretching her sore muscles and taking a moment to gather her thoughts. She felt a renewed determination to continue. They had survived so much already, and she knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but it was also a path to freedom. They mounted their horses and resumed their journey. The landscape changed as they moved, from rocky hills to open fields and gentle streams. Clara learned to navigate the land more confidently, noticing subtle signs of wildlife, travelers, or potential threats. James taught her to move quietly, to trust her instincts, and to remain calm even when fear threatened to overwhelm her. Each lesson was vital, a skill that would help them survive the challenges ahead. By late morning, they reached a ridge that overlooked a distant valley. From this vantage point, James could see the land stretching for miles. The town was far behind and the trail ahead appeared clear, but James knew better than to assume safety. He scanned the valley carefully, looking for any signs of pursuit or danger. Clara watched him closely, sensing the tension in his posture. She realized that his vigilance was not just for her protection, but also a way to ensure their survival. As they descended into the valley, the path became more difficult, with loose rocks, steep inclines, and narrow passages. Clara's horse stumbled again, and she felt a surge of fear. James reached out quickly, steadying her and whispering words of encouragement. "Stay calm. We're almost through this section," he said. Clara focused on her breathing, on the path ahead, and on the steady presence of James beside her. Together, they moved forward, step by step, determined to reach the safety of the hidden ranch. By afternoon, they reached a small grove of trees with a hidden spring. James led the horses to drink and graze while Clara washed her face and hands in the cool water. She felt a moment of relief, a brief pause in the relentless journey. Yet both knew that their freedom was not guaranteed. Danger could appear at any moment and the town's posse would not stop searching for them. James spoke quietly, outlining the final stretch of the journey to the ranch. Clara listened intently, her resolve stronger than ever. As evening approached, they prepared for the last leg of the day's journey. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the valley. Clara mounted her horse, feeling the soreness in her muscles but also a renewed sense of determination. James followed closely, guiding their path with careful precision. Each mile brought them closer to the ranch, to safety, and to a future that seemed brighter with every step. The last stretch of their journey stretched ahead of them, a mix of hills, valleys, and dense groves that promised safety but also carried hidden dangers. Clara and James rode with quiet determination, both exhausted but unwilling to slow down. Each mile they traveled was a step closer to freedom for Clara and a step deeper into uncertainty for James. The town's posse would not give up easily, and the threat of discovery hung over them like a storm cloud. Yet despite the fear, there was hope, a fragile bright thread that kept them moving forward. Clara's muscles ached from days of riding, her hands blistered and raw, her back stiff from hours in the saddle. But she had learned to push through the pain, focusing on the rhythm of her horse's movements and the steady presence of James beside her. She had survived the worst, and now, each challenge was a reminder of her resilience. Every hill climbed, every stream crossed, every narrow path navigated was a victory in itself. James guided them carefully, scanning the horizon and listening to the faint sounds of the land. The wind carried scents and distant noises, each one a clue that could signal safety or danger. He adjusted their path to avoid open areas where they might be seen and chose trails that offered cover. His mind was constantly calculating, always 2 steps ahead. He had risked his life once to save Clara, and he would continue to do so until she was truly safe. By midday, they reached a wide valley, dotted with trees and crisscrossed by small streams. James slowed the horses, allowing them to graze and drink while he surveyed the land. The valley was beautiful, peaceful in a way that seemed almost unreal after the harsh journey they had endured. Clara knelt beside one of the streams, letting the cool water wash away the dust and sweat from her skin. She felt a small sense of peace, a rare moment of calm in a life that had been filled with fear and danger for far too long. As they rested, James spoke quietly. "We're close," he said. "There's a ranch beyond the next ridge. My friend will hide you and you can rest properly. You'll be safe there, at least for now." Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. The thought of shelter, food, and safety was almost overwhelming. She had spent days on the run, always alert, always fearing discovery. The idea of a safe place where she could simply breathe was like a dream come true. They mounted their horses again, moving cautiously toward the ridge. The climb was steep, and the ground was loose in places, forcing them to move slowly. Clara's horse stumbled once and she felt a surge of panic. James reached out instinctively, steadying her. "Easy," he murmured. "We're almost there, just a little further." His calm presence gave her strength. She focused on the rhythm of the horse, the feel of the reins, and the sound of James guiding her. Together, they made it to the top of the ridge. From there, they could see the ranch in the distance, a small cluster of buildings surrounded by trees and fields. Smoke rose from the chimney, a sign that someone was home. James's face softened slightly, though he remained vigilant. "We'll be safe there," he said. "But we still have to be careful until we reach the house." Clara nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of exhaustion and hope. The journey was almost over, and she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond fear. They descended the ridge slowly, moving through the trees that offered cover. James guided them along a hidden path that led directly to the ranch. Clara's excitement grew with every step. She could see the fenced fields, the barns, and the farmhouse where she would finally find rest. The thought of safety after so many days of danger brought tears to her eyes, but she held them back, focusing instead on the present moment. As they approached the ranch, a man stepped out from behind the house. He was tall, with kind eyes and a steady presence. James spoke quickly, explaining their situation. The man nodded and led them inside, offering water, food, and a place to rest. Clara sank into a chair, finally allowing herself to relax. The exhaustion of the past days hit her all at once, and she felt the tension in her body melt away. She was safe, for the first time in what felt like forever. The rancher's kindness was simple but profound. He provided them with a room to rest, blankets to warm themselves, and a meal that Clara ate slowly, savoring every bite. She felt a sense of normalcy returning, a feeling that had been absent for days. James sat beside her, watching carefully but allowing her to rest. The bond between them had grown through the journey, built on trust, courage, and shared danger. Clara felt gratitude and something deeper, an admiration for the man who had risked everything for her freedom. As night fell, Clara reflected on the journey they had undertaken. She had faced false accusation, public humiliation, and the threat of death, yet she had survived. She had learned to trust, to endure hardship, and to find strength she never knew she had. James had taught her to move through fear with determination, to rely on skill and instinct, and to never give up hope. The journey had changed her, making her stronger, wiser, and more aware of the value of freedom. James, too, reflected on the events of the past days. He had risked his reputation, safety, and life to save someone he barely knew, yet he felt no regret. The price he paid was high. He could not return to the town. His name was now marked in the eyes of the law, and danger still lingered, but the reward was greater. He had saved an innocent life, and in doing so, he had upheld a principle he valued above all else: justice. The bond he shared with Clara was now unbreakable, forged in the fires of danger and courage. In the days that followed, Clara began to rebuild her life. She worked on the ranch, helping with chores and learning new skills. The physical work was tiring, but it gave her a sense of purpose and normalcy. She also spent time with James, learning from him, sharing stories, and growing in confidence. The fear that had once dominated her life slowly gave way to hope and determination. She realized that freedom was not just the absence of danger, but the presence of safety, opportunity, and trust. James continued to watch over her, always vigilant, yet allowing her to grow independent. He knew that the world beyond the ranch was still dangerous, but he also knew that Clara had learned the skills to navigate it. Their journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been transformative. They had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty together, and in doing so, they had discovered resilience, courage, and trust. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Clara and James stood outside the ranch, looking at the land stretching before them. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of grass and wildflowers. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the freedom she had fought so hard to attain. James stood beside her, silent but supportive. They had survived the journey, and though the cost had been high, they had achieved something remarkable: life, freedom, and the knowledge that courage and compassion could overcome even the darkest of challenges. Clara turned to James, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. I don't know what I would have done without you." James gave a small smile, his eyes reflecting both relief and pride. "You survived because you never gave up," he replied. "I only helped you see the way." Clara nodded, understanding that the journey had been as much about her courage as it had been about his bravery. The days continued at the ranch, slow and steady. Clara regained her strength, learned new skills, and grew more confident in her abilities. She and James often rode together, exploring the nearby hills and valleys, always cautious but free in a way they had not been before. The fear that had once shadowed her life faded, replaced by determination, skill, and hope for the future. Though the town would always remember the story of the woman who had escaped death under the sun, for Clara and James, the journey had become a story of survival, courage, and trust. They had faced impossible odds, risked everything, and emerged stronger. The world was still dangerous, but they had discovered that with bravery, careful planning, and faith in one another, even the greatest challenges could be overcome. And so, under the endless sky and the warm glow of the sun, Clara found the freedom she had fought so hard to attain. James, though forever marked by the cost of his actions, found a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had stood for what was right. Together, they had navigated fear, danger, and uncertainty, and emerged with life, hope, and the knowledge that courage and compassion could change the course of fate itself.